Hello and welcome back to another YouTube yoga video with me. My name is Jessie. If you've never had a class with me here before, I've just uploaded a handful of videos so far, but I plan to make many more in the future. So today's video is going to be all about the hips. So we're going to warm into this area and then get into some salutation flow that will really work through any tension and knots and soreness that you might be experiencing in that area of the body that many of us do experience those things in. We hold a lot of trauma, stress, and things like that in our hips. And we also spend a lot of time just sitting, and the muscles tend to shorten. So we're going to work through all that, and we're going to start in a seated position with your legs crossed if that's comfortable. If not, then you can feel free to adjust your seat and sit however is comfortable for you, whether that be legs outstretched. You could sit on your shins, or you could put your soles of your feet together. Just shifting around until you find something that works, and then grounding down into your sit bones. And then sitting up tall from that foundational point, feeling both points of your hips grounding down into the floor. Just resting the hands on the knees gently. Letting the eyes be softly closed. Relax your jaw. Relax your forehead. Letting your shoulders relax. Bringing them back and then allowing them to come down. Your knees are allowed to just fall out to the sides as much as possible. And let's start to just work with our breath here for a moment. So inhaling, feeling that cool air as it starts to enter into your nostrils and pass through your respiratory system, filling your lungs. You feel that expansion through the side body, your front body. Maybe even the back body if you're already breathing really deeply. If you're not breathing very deeply, then purposely start to take a couple of deep breaths now. Breathing all the way down into your stomach, trying to expand through that area of the body a little bit with each inhale. And then feeling that area contract, navel pulling back in towards the spine as you exhale. The spine staying nice and tall and upright through that whole process of the breath. Inhale the arms up overhead. Bring them down, palms together through the center line of the exhale. Continue to take a couple more breaths like that. Let's do 3. And then on the 4th one, we'll bring the arms up. And rather than bringing them down through the center line, we're going to bring the palms down to the floor in front. You can open your eyes if you like, and then you'll start to walk your hands forward, coming into a little bit of a forward fold. So you don't need to go really deep. We're still very early on in this practice. We're warming up. So you're going to feel whatever hip corresponds with the leg in the front. You're going to feel that hip opening as if you're sitting in Pigeon Pose, if you know what Pigeon Pose is. If you don't, we will practice it later on, so you will be learning all about Pigeon Pose in just a few short minutes. I try to keep this practice to about half an hour, but I don't want to be rushed because the hips do take time to open. Sitting up. And we'll switch the cross of the legs. So you'll take whatever leg is in front, switch so it's behind. Sitting, grounding again, getting that seat like we're stuck to the floor through both of our sit bones. You don't want to be leaning to one side or imbalanced here. You want to really feel both sides grounding evenly as you rise up through the rest of your spine. Let's take another 3 breaths. Inhale, lifting the arms up. Exhale down. Inhale, so we're just taking these breaths with intention. They're not the slowest breaths of all time, but we are making them full, filling through the belly on each inhale and letting that navel come in towards the spine with each exhale. And then with this 4th breath, we're going to bring the arms up, opening the eyes, gently bringing the hands down to the floor and walking your hands forward. Coming to bring the chest nice and low towards the floor, bringing the face low as well. Really allowing especially that knee on whatever side is being stretched to go over to the side. One more breath here. And then we'll start to come back to seat. So sitting up nice and tall here, we're just going to go through a couple of basic stretches to warm up the spine because we don't want to completely ignore the upper body and only stretch the lower body. So we'll inhale the arms up overhead again here. Exhale over to the left side, side bend. You're reaching up and over with the right hand, keeping the sit bones grounded as you arch up and over. And then inhale, reaching both arms up. In the center, you might even look up, and then exhale over to the other side. Exact same stretch. Opening the chest up towards the side wall, even towards the ceiling, gazing towards the ceiling while keeping the sit bones both grounded down. So it's very easy to lift up through the side that you're pulling away from, but then you won't really be stretching your side body. And then coming back up again, reaching those arms up, inhale. And we'll take a twist back towards that initial left side. So this is much less tricky than it might look if you've never practiced this kind of a twist. You're going to bring this right hand over to the left knee. Left hand is going to plant just behind your hip. So that hand behind you is going to help you sit up nice and tall so you're not slouching. So I'll automatically notice you'll start to slouch. So you're sitting up nice and tall, starting to turn towards the side. Take an inhale breath. And as you exhale, you're going to turn the rest of the way that you can comfortably turn. So again, we're still warming up. We're early on in the practice. You don't need to go super hard into this twist. If you are a practiced yogi, you can just take it at about 50 to 75% of what you might be able to do. Focus on the breathing, taking those really deep breaths. And then release, arms come up. Exhale to the other side. So again, just crossing left arm across the body, right hand just behind the right hip, sitting up on an inhale breath. And exhaling through the twist, through the mid body. Sometimes with twists you can have a bit of gas, to say it gently, from whatever side. As we're twisting, we're working through our digestion. And I actually did just eat a protein bar before I started filming this, so there you go. So in other words, if you're ever experiencing need to pass gas during a yoga class, it's not anything to necessarily feel ashamed of. In India, I've heard that they'll encourage you to let it go. Let it out, release it. It's no longer serving you. Let's release this twist. Coming back to the center, you can just take a couple little shifts And reset your spine in the center, and you can even take a couple little shoulder circles, inhaling the shoulders up and exhaling them back down and around, just to set them in that alignment that we're looking for. Okay, so we're going to come into child's pose, turning to the side, and your knees just underneath your hips, hands, palms planted just underneath your elbows, which are right underneath your shoulders. So you don't want your arms to be on a funny angle. You want them right underneath the shoulders. So once you're all lined up, you can take your knees out a little wider, start to sit back towards your heels. So as you do that, you might want to move your arms or hands slightly further forward, or you might not need to at all as you lower your chest down towards the floor. It all depends on your body proportions. It actually plays a really, really big role in yoga, which I never knew that until I went to yoga teacher training. So resting the head down, the forearms, the elbows can be down on the floor, or you can keep them lifted if you really want to reach and kind of stretch through the underarm, side body area. Sitting the hips back as much as you can. They might not go all the way to the heels, and that's fine. So this child's pose is a nice way to work through the hips. You could even start to move a little bit through side to side. And just get those hip joints moving and opening backwards. Taking a little pulse back, moving out to the side. Pulse back, over to the side. And eventually just settling the hips down and back. So one more breath here, and then we'll come to cat-cow. So back onto our hands and knees again here. You'll start on an inhale breath, so exhale your current cycle, and then inhale, dropping the belly down and becoming this cow in the field with a big belly, looking for more grass in front of it to graze on. And then as we exhale, we'll become a cat, angry cat, arching the back, tucking the tail under, and gazing down. Typically an angry cat wouldn't gaze down, but for this stretch we are. And then repeating through those two. So sometimes it does help to imagine those animals and really exaggerate the shapes. Making sure that you're breathing at the correct time. So you want to be inhale, expanding, dropping the belly. Exhaling, contracting, bringing everything in as you arch and exhale. Let's do one more repetition through that. Again, another great way to warm up through the hips, but also the shoulders and the spine as well. So we're pretty well warmed up now, I would say. So we're going to start to move towards our downward facing dog pose. So for downward facing dog, we'll probably spend quite a bit of time in it as I explain, and then we'll move on from there. But if you find that you're getting sore or tired from holding it while I talk, please feel free to come down out of it and then come back into it as needed if you're more of a beginner. So spreading out your fingers nice and wide. You're gonna really ground down through your palms, but also through your fingertips. So a lot of people get sore wrists in downward facing dog, and it's because they're not distributing the weight through their whole hands. They're just dumping it into their palms like they could lift their fingers off. So all that weight is just bearing down into one spot on the mat. It's like when you're on thin ice, you should lie down, right, and spread out your weight. Same idea with this. You want to spread the weight out into the fingertips. Once you do that, you'll feel really nice and grounded down through your hands, and you'll be ready to get into a super strong and solid downward facing dog. So tucking under the toes is our next step here. Then you'll start to lift the knees off. First, I like to just bring them to a hover for a second here. Feel the abs start to turn on before lifting up the hips first up and then back as well. So with the hips nice and high and then being moved back I'm gonna enter into a really nice downward facing dog, and you'll notice I'm keeping my knees a little bit bent here, and that's something that I like to tell people to do in their downward facing dog, especially their first one for a practice, just to let your legs start to warm up more gradually by pulsing into straighter legs rather than just going for those straight legs right off the bat, even if you are a flexible bodied person. And then let's just take some steps towards the front. But I guess that wasn't too long of a hold. So walking your feet in towards your hands until you get to about 2/3 of the way up your mat. Inhale, coming to a halfway lifted posture. So this is a tricky one. It's nice to have a mirror nearby, and I just so happen to have one here so I can see if I'm making a nice right angle shape with the body. So you want to have your legs and then your spine, the upper body, basically making an upside down L shape or a right angle. Reaching the crown of the head forward, so that's our inhale breath, and then exhale. I like to bend through the knees for my forward folds quite a bit, especially if I'm pretty stiff through the lower body, or if it's my first practice for the day or maybe for a few days. And I'll be honest, yeah, this is my first time practicing yoga in a couple of days, so I'm not quite as limber as I might normally be, and that is totally okay. Just hanging out, taking deep breaths in our forward fold here. It's a great way to open up through the hamstrings, through the glutes, and then into the lower back as well. So I hope you feel that long chain of opening happening right from the backs of the knees and starting from there and going all the way up. Just letting the head and neck be heavy. You can shake your head no, nod yes. You can even be a little adventurous and sway side to side here. Inhale, halfway lift again. So coming to that, again, right angle, posture, positioning. You can have your hands on your legs, that's fine. And then exhale down. We're going to roll all the way up to standing now. So coming through by rolling up. So you start by stacking the vertebra in the lower spine. Eventually get up to shoulders, head and neck are going to come last. And then I also like to just take an inhale breath, lift up the arms, and finish with a little exhale, bringing the arms down to heart center before releasing the hands to the sides. So we're in a standing position here, which is also a yoga pose. Again, that might be old news for you, but when you're just standing, with proper alignment, of course, and it's called mountain pose. So for mountain pose, the key things to watch out for, in my opinion anyway, some yoga teachers might disagree, are making sure that you've got a little bit of a bend in your knees and that you're grounding through your feet in the same way that we were just grounding through the hands. So making sure those toes are nice and active and gripping into your mat. Then you want to make sure your pelvis isn't too tucked under. So we've probably all seen people that, kind of have a little bit of this going on. And then on the other end of the spectrum, where I tend to fall, is I tend to do this one. I call it the dreaded Donald Trump. Your butt sticking out and your chest a little bit forward. Of course, I don't stand quite that, but that's my normal stance, I would say, right there. And I'm a little bit forward. So with a slight tuck of the pelvis, so you analyze for yourself where you need to adjust, and you can actually take a hand to your belly and a hand to your lower back and feel it out. So you'll notice when you get a nice tilt of your pelvis that your belly almost automatically pulls in a little bit because your core muscles are turning on. Now you're asking them to do some work, basically. When I stand like this, my abdomen's very relaxed. It's more of my lower back, which is probably why I have some lower back problems. Once that's corrected, then that core is like, okay, now I have to do some work to help to stabilize as well. So it takes a little bit of the burden off of the lower back. From there, you should have a pretty nice aligned straight spine by now from all the warm-ups that we've done, but you do want to just make sure those shoulders are back and down. And the last thing is we tend to naturally crane our heads forward a little bit from mostly using technology, so we want to just bring that back into line as well. Once you've done that, you should be in a very beautiful a standing posture to start with our sun salutation. So inhale the arms up overhead, exhaling, coming down into a forward fold. Hands come to the shins, inhale, halfway lift. Exhale to fold, plant, hands plant down. We're gonna step back 1 foot at a time, finding ourselves a nice high plank, which I like to hold for a nice breath here before moving on. We'll drop the knees, exhale down to the floor with control. So we're not just flopping onto the floor, we're really controlling the way down. From here, inhale, lifting into cobra by pressing the floor away, keeping the elbows in and lifting the chest forward. From there, pushing the floor away yet again, coming back into our tabletop position so we can transfer into downward facing dog, tucking the toes under, really spreading out through the fingertips again, lifting the hips up and then back. You might want to walk your feet in a little bit or out a little bit. And feel free to keep the knees bent if you want to here still too. From here, we're going to lift one of our legs. So whichever foot is going to be in the, or is going to be not lifted, is going to move to the center. So let's move the left foot into the middle, and we'll lift the right leg up first. So you'll lift your right leg, you can keep the knee bent, whatever you need, any amount. So it might be super high, might be even higher than mine, it might be a lot lower, and that's totally fine. You're going to bend through the knee, and then bring that knee in towards your chest as you step it through towards your hands. So we're getting into a nice little lunge stance here, and we're going to drop the back knee down, untucking the back toes, and you may want to move your front foot forward a little bit more depending on your level of flexibility. So if you're very flexible, then you will have a nice wide open type of lunge. If you're a little bit less flexible, and know that there's no shame in being inflexible, that's why we're practicing yoga, a lot of us, is to work on building our flexibility because we weren't born into really flexible bodies. So you might be in more of a close lunge stance like this. And as long as you're feeling some kind of opening in your hip flexor on your left side, and maybe something in the hip on your right, then you're doing just fine. That's really not about how it looks, it's more about how it feels. So bringing your hands, interlacing them just on the upper thigh here, and breathing into your lunge. So first, a real deep hip opener. Breathing through it. It can be pretty intense. Bringing the hands back down to the floor. We're going to take an inhale, lift the chest. And then exhale, send the hips back towards the heels, kind of. It's not like with child's pose though, where you'll really be able to sit all the way back, unless you're super flexible. But even then, it might be pretty tough. You're just sitting far back enough that you can feel this opening down the whole back of the leg. I can literally feel this right from my heel all the way up to my hips. Keeping the knee a little bit bent if that serves you, or you can try to straighten the leg all the way out as you're folding forward slightly. So I like to keep a little bit of a bend in the knee when I forward fold, just in general. So that's a variation I like to use. You're welcome to discard that if it's not for you. Coming back forward. Again here, just walking the hands forward as well. You'll tuck under the back toe, lifting onto the back foot. So now we're in a little bit of a different lunge situation, so a little bit of a higher lunge. And from there, we're going to start to move that back foot in a bit. So that might be too much. That should probably be good. Make sure that your foot, the back foot isn't right behind the front foot. That's going to make it very difficult to balance. You want it to be a little bit out to the side. You can halfway lift here, Inhale, reaching the crown of the head forward, hands on the front shin, making sure to keep a little tiny bit of a bend in this front knee. So you don't really ever want to be locking your joints. And then forward folding over that front leg. And it's a really subtle forward fold for most people. You're not necessarily going to be able to come right down onto your leg, but the goal is to hinge from the hips so that you can have your belly make a connection to your upper leg here. Trying to keep the hips nice and square as well. So if you notice your left hip opening towards the back, just bring it around to the side again so it's squared off with your right hip. Let's come on up, halfway lift again, bring the hands back down to the floor. We're going to step that back foot back again, and then we're going to heel toe our foot on the right out to the side. Option to lower the knee down if that is something that works for you here. I know some people prefer to practice their lizard pose, which is the name of this particular pose, with the knee lifted off of the floor, and it will still open into your hips, absolutely. If you notice your knee hurts when you put your foot down or when you rest it on the floor, then you can try keeping your toe tucked under and see if that helps. That can help to take some of the pressure off, and it might work for you. Or you can practice the knee lifted version. From this point, if you want to go even deeper into the stretch, then you can start to open the right knee out to the side by shifting onto the pinky side edge of your foot. So that just opens up everything a lot more. Again, that doesn't work necessarily for all bodies, so if you try it and it feels icky and you don't like it, then feel free to not practice that variation, although sometimes when something just feels, kind of challenging, we'll back away from it too. So judge for yourself the difference. You can come down onto your forearms if that's something that works for you, if you want to anyways. So for me today, I think that's actually pushing it a little bit too much. Like I said, I haven't stretched or done yoga much the past few days, so I'm going to give the forearms a pass, but you can absolutely go down onto the forearms if you are called to do so. So moving towards pigeon now, we'll start to bring a sole of the foot back down on the floor if you had it open to the side, and you'll start to heel toe that foot back in towards the center as well. Once it comes to the center, you can actually keep heel toeing so it comes across the other side of your mat. So this is starting to get a little tricky as you lower your leg to the side. And I always forget to do the other side first with pigeon when I'm filming because it's kind of hard to tell where my foot is. My foot is not over here by my hand. As I move my leg down into place, the foot naturally shifts over more to about this level. So the foot is angled in, sort of towards the hip on the other side, if that makes sense. Just like with our little standing forward fold with one leg that we did, you want to make sure that your hips are square. So it's going to be the right hip coming down and the left hip coming up. Naturally, you want to fight that and recenter those hips, squaring them off to the floor. So sitting up nice and tall here first, and sort of getting used to this positioning with the legs. And then if you like, you can try coming down onto the forearms. This actually, in my opinion, doesn't require more flexibility. It might even feel better or easier for certain people. So give it a try and see if that is a modification that works for you. And then get into a rhythm of breath. So we are going to stay in this pigeon pose for a little bit. This is a really deep one, the deepest that we're going to go today. And we want to get the most out of it. So you don't want to get into this crazy pose and then just get out of it right away. We took all this work to get here, so we're going to stay here and soak in the benefits for at least 30 seconds. Probably been about 15 so far, so we're going to take about 3 more really deep breaths before we even think about exiting this pose. And know that quite frequently it'll be your mind playing tricks on you, telling you that you need to get out of the pose while your body is actually fine. Mind over matter a little bit here. One more breath if you can. And then from here we'll shift back onto the hands, and we're going to try to transition straight back into downward facing dog from our pigeon pose. So getting those hands planted down, your foundation right, tuck under the toe. You can shift that knee forward a little bit as you start to get into a position where you can lift onto your foot, getting that leg up off the floor and stepping it back. If that didn't go so well, then no worries. Get into downward facing dog in whatever way is going to work for you. You can take a little bit of a pulse here, really noticing the difference between your two hips right now, and I can feel a huge difference between my two hips. It feels like there's a massive knot in my left one, and it feels like my right one is so just free and almost like floaty, if that makes any sense. It feels like I have two completely different hips and legs. So we're going to lift up through that left one, so moving the right into the center, lifting through the left leg, pointing the toes, sending it as high as you can, and then bending the knee in, bringing it towards the chest and stepping through. So coming into that low lunge position, that was our first stop on our little flow. Untucking the back toe, and that same tip, if you have sore knees here, you can keep the toes tucked under. So just getting used to the pose first before we come into the lifted version where we're bringing our arms, rather hands, to interlace right on top of the thigh. So inhale, exhale, and bring the hands back down to your mat. Second pose is our half split, where we're sending our hips back, walking the hands back as well as we come into a little bit of a forward fold. Just keeping this front knee a little bit bent and sitting back as much as you can towards the hips, keeping the hips square. So that's sort of a pattern through today's class. So again, if you're just sitting back willy-nilly, you're going to tend to sit back further to this side, but then I'm turning towards you guys, right? So my hips aren't square then. I want to be squared towards the side wall. Okay, so feeling that opening down the back of the leg, bringing the belly down towards the upper thigh as you hinge. And then let's walk the hands back forward again, releasing that one. Tucking under the back toe as we come into our slightly higher lunge here. Just for a moment, we're going to bring the back foot in a bit and slightly over to the side so that we can enter into, this is called pyramid pose. I'm not sure that I named it on the other side, but just keeping a little bit of a bend in the front knee. Inhale, halfway lift, reaching the head forward, crown of the head, and then exhale. Oh, that is tight. So bringing the belly down towards the leg. As with any forward fold, you really want to try to establish that connection, because it means that your lower back is straight and it's not bending in any kind of funky ways. And let's release that, just bringing the hands back down, again stepping back, lowering the knee or not as we find our lizard pose on the second side. So heel toeing that foot, that left foot over to the side as you get into your version of lizard. So it might look different from mine, and that is totally fine. I mean, it will look different than mine because you're not me and I'm not you, and you know, but just it's different. Yoga is such an individual practice that, you know, every pose basically looks different when it's done by a different person. Finding yourself either on your hands, or maybe you want to come down onto the forearms. Just for fun, I'm going to see if the side is equally as tight as the other side, or yeah, actually pretty much is. So I'm going to stay on the hands on the side as well. I usually would encourage you to just do the same that you did on the other side. But there's no harm in seeing what's going on and doing a little experiment there. I am a scientist by academic background, and I do like to look at my yoga practice as kind of an experiment on myself sometimes. What happens if I do this, collecting data. You might want to move your hips a little bit around here. We're just about ready to transition into our pigeon pose here. So why don't we go ahead and do that? So you can sort of lift, so we'll set the sole of the foot back down on the left hand side, move your hips so you can heel toe the foot back into the center, and then right over towards this side. So you can see as I start to lower the thigh down and the shin down, automatically the foot just comes to stay by the hip. Now, really advanced yogis are people who have very open hips by nature, can angle their foot so that it would stay to this angle right out from the knee. And if that's the kind of body that you're living in, then by all means, please practice your pigeon the way that feels best for you. This is how it feels best for me, and this is how I typically see most people practicing it. So you want to be, again, squaring your chest and your hips off towards the front so we don't have any rotations happening here, right? And then if you like, you can come down onto the forearms. Again, not more challenging necessarily, just changes some of the angles. Whether you want to stay up on the hands or come down to the forearms, it's up to you. Taking some deep breaths here. So again, this is the pose where we're going to stay for the longest. So if your mind is already protesting, just remind it that, it's wrong. That your body, in fact, can handle this pose, and it can stay in this pose for another few breaths. So we're probably at about the halfway mark. Keep breathing. 3 more. At least 3 more big deep breaths. Feeling into that hip, using your mind's eye, sending your attention there and noticing where you're feeling the stretch, where it's very strong, where it's maybe a little bit weaker. Noticing any resistance that comes up around this pose. And let's start to come on up onto the hands again here, just getting the hands planted. We're again going to shift back into that downward facing dog, moving the knee forward a little bit, tucking the toe under, and then getting yourself shifted into our downward facing dog pose again here. So from downward facing dog, we'll just go through one more vinyasa and then call it a day. So let's shift forward into a high plank, lowering the knees down, and then coming to the floor with control. Inhale, cobra, pressing the floor away, elbows stay in, shoulders stay back and down. Push the floor away, exhale, finding yourself back in downward facing dog, tucking the toes and sending the hips up and back. So you can play with straightening out the legs now, or pulsing through the knees, straightening a little bit at a time, and just noticing now, do your hips feel a little bit more balanced? They both feel better than they did previously. Hopefully they do. Let's walk the feet forward towards the hands, and we're going to come down into a yogi squat. So keeping your feet nice and wide apart, even angling the toes out a little bit. You're going to bring your hips down towards the floor. Elbows are going to come to the insides of your knees. Your elbows are going to act kind of as stabilizers. So hold your knees apart so that they're not coming and folding in on you, because that's what's going to happen otherwise. Keeping those hips nice and super open, opening through the groins, deep into the inner hips here. Sitting up nice and tall as well. So when I first enter this, I sometimes notice myself a little slouchy. So if that's you as well, just lift that chest up towards the ceiling, or at least the wall in front of you, and gaze forward with a nice lifted crown of your head as well. And then let's gently sit back so you can bring the hips down nice and slowly and gently there. So we're done with the hard part of this practice for sure, but we still want to cool down. We don't want to go from 60 to 0 all at once. So we're going to just work on the core a tiny bit with boat pose. So sitting back onto your hip bones so you can feel them grounding. And then you're going to start to lift the heels away. You'll hear my voice shake a little bit as my abs are turning on and doing some work here. So you can hold behind the legs if you like. What you don't want to do is what I'm about to show you. So letting your chest sink and rounding through the spine. You want to avoid that at all costs. You want to be lifting the chest, keeping the spine nice and long. Nice V shape, and then if you want to release behind the knees, you can bring your hands, palms up right along your shins. Abs really starting to burn and shake. Let's come on out of it. Just bringing the heels to the floor again, and let's lie down now. So no fancy core work, just lie down. Awesome. So 1 or 2 more poses here. Let's do 2. There's 2 I want to do here. So first off, we'll bring our left leg in towards the chest. Just hugging that knee in. So if you are in a body where you found pigeon to be really painful and darn near impossible, well, first of all, I should have grabbed a block and shown you how to use a block. You can just put it under your hips to add some height, but another way to practice pigeon is by doing it on the floor, basically flipping pigeon over. So what we're going to do for this reclined pigeon pose is bring your right foot so it's planted on the floor as well. You can cross that left ankle so it's just over the knee there. Okay, so you'll open the left knee back towards the left side. And you'll feel automatically that left hip starting to have some kind of opening as you're pressing the knee away once it's in this position. So there's a couple ways to do this. If you want to take it further, if you're really tight, this might be all you need. But if you're in a more open body, then you can take your hands and start to interlace or wrap them so that you're coming around the back of the leg and interlacing. Make sure that you're able to still lie back down after you've interlaced and rest your back completely down on your mat, because you don't want to be curled up and in that kind of a position the whole time. It's not going to really work super well for you. So finding something comfortable and sustainable for a few moments. So this is really the whole pose here. So rather than having our legs straight out back, we're using it to keep our leg in this position. So again, it's like I was mentioning, if you're keeping your upper leg straight out from, or your calf straight out from your knee, that's another way of practicing pigeon that goes much deeper. So this is sort of accessing that depth of the pigeon without the added gravity. That's really the thing that makes pigeon so intense, is that we have our whole body weight bearing down onto the hips. Here we can pull in more or less, or not at all, and let's release. So last pose I wanted to go through here is just going to be a little spinal twist. So bring your legs both in towards your chest. Bring your right hand over towards your left knee. You're going to keep your knees together and keep your left shoulder planted down on the floor, so you can actually take that left arm and bring it out from the side, out from the shoulder, as you start to roll onto the side body, onto the right side body. Ooh. So you might have to move your hips over a little bit towards the left in order to make this happen, but there we go. So if you're able to bring both legs all the way over to the side while keeping that left shoulder down, that's the ideal situation. But if you need to backtrack and bring the legs up a little bit in order to keep the shoulder planted, then do so. Closing off the eyes here. You might turn your head towards the left-hand side as well. And then knees in towards the center again here, just hugging them in for a moment before you release the left foot down to the floor, recentering yourself on your mat as well. If you had moved your hips over to the side, then of course once you roll over you'll be in a different position than you were originally. So we're bringing our right ankle on top of the leg this time, keeping that right knee opening out to the side. So this is sort of stop number one. You can hang out here, just focusing on opening the knee away, keeping the hips square and opening the hip that way, no problem. But if you like, then you're going to be interlacing the hands back around that left thigh and then resting your back and shoulders back down. So you're pulling gently in on that leg as you move the right knee out to the right. So you still want to be moving that knee in its own direction, not letting it come in towards the center. I always like to rock a little bit from side to side in this reclined pigeon. If that doesn't feel good for you though, feel free to leave it. And then for our spinal twist, so again, both knees are going to come in towards the chest, right arm out to the side. Maybe we'll move the hips before we get into our twist this time. And then coming over towards the left with those legs, keeping the right hand shoulder. So you don't want that right hand shoulder lifting off and going along for the ride with the twist, because it's one of your foundation points. It needs to stay grounded in order for you to actually get something out of this twist. You can close off the eyes here if you like. And then coming back in towards the center. Again, you might want to move your hips back to the middle of your mat if they're quite off. And then the last pose we'll do is happy baby, just taking for the outside edges of the feet and then opening the soles up towards the ceiling, so you can rock a little bit from side to side here. Usually feels pretty good to really just open up through those inner groins and hips to a really wide degree. Breathing still, even as you're having fun, you're still intentionally inhaling and exhaling. Maybe you want to just take some stillness in the center with this pose as well. That's totally fine. And then releasing, just bringing the legs down to the mat, sending them out long, letting the feet flop out to the side, just allowing your body to become very restful and very heavy as we finish off this practice with a little mini Shavasana. So we won't spend a lot of time on this part, but I always feel like it's weird to just end it without. So letting your face be relaxed, releasing any tension from your brows, from your jaw, cheeks. Notice if you're taking really big belly breaths or not, and make sure you adjust so that you are breathing deeply and you are expanding through your stomach as well as your chest. Just letting your body be completely relaxed and letting your mind follow suit. Sometimes once we get our body into a state of relaxation, our mind can jump into action mode. Try not to let that happen. Here, with yoga, we cultivate this state of peace. And it's so easy to lose it if you just start planning and thinking about your to-do list. So I encourage you to just let any thoughts that come up pass by without you attaching onto them and going on a ride on the train of thought, as I like to use as a metaphor. So just let that train go by. That's not your train. Not time yet. Just remain in the stillness. Remain with your breath. Let that anchor you to the present moment. Take as much time as you need or desire to just stay in your Shavasana here. We usually recommend you spend about 10% of the amount of time that you practiced at the very least. So that means at least 4 to 5 minutes, if not longer, of relaxation now. Just let yourself bask in that post-yoga glow. And we'll see you again soon. Thanks for practicing with me. Make sure to hit the thumbs up and subscribe to help support me. Thanks.